So before we begin with today's review of the Soviet armored cars and adjacent vehicles, just wanted to get the housekeeping out of the way. Thank you to whoever did point out the audio issue that was in the previous videos. I am just realizing that now, so apologies for that. Hopefully it's been fixed. Turned out to be a relatively simple issue, but I never claimed to be good at this. But thank you for pointing that out, and hopefully things will be fixed from now on going forward. Sorry about any videos that still have that, but going forward, hopefully it will be fixed. So anyways, today we're going to be reviewing Soviet armored cars and sort of light vehicles. I know there's a few more that are included, but I'm kind of just going with what the game has told me is an armored car. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and I do appreciate it. So to start off, we have the BA-20, basic armored car, really quite fast, crew of 3, and it is machine gun armed with the DT. Now personally, I find the DT to be one of the, well, how do I put this? It's not a bad machine gun, but it's probably one of the most underwhelming in the game. It has a relatively limited magazine, and it's not overly accurate, and it doesn't have the best stopping power. So, you know, it's not like the Bren gun where you're compensating with a lot better accuracy, and it's not like the MG34 where you at least have a good magazine capacity. I find it's kind of underwhelming. So, to be honest, I think it's one of the worst machine guns in the game for vehicles. That being said, that is the sole armament of a few of the vehicles we're reviewing today, which I think is a bit of a downside to the Soviet faction. The other downside to this vehicle is it has extremely thin armor, 3 to 6, which means that in places it can actually be penetrated by small arms, so rifles, essentially, machine guns. That's a big problem for something that is armored. The purpose of an armored car is that you can move around the battlefield and kind of ignore people shooting small arms at you. Otherwise, you'd be in a soft skin, and this doesn't really fully fulfill that. So that's definitely a big issue with it. So, you know, okay, yes, it's better than nothing. It is an armored car, but I wouldn't really recommend taking it, just because you can spend those points on something I think a lot more useful, more infantry potentially, some ammo crates. That actually might do you better than taking one of these. I understand that it is quite mobile, so it's a great way to get a machine gun around, but the downsides kind of outweigh it, in my opinion. So taking the command version kind of also seems like a bit of an issue, because I get the point of bringing a command armored car because it gets your commander around the battlefield quickly. It makes them more reactive, and it does protect them. The problem with this is they're going to still be quite vulnerable, and you can't get behind things as easily. So when you're at this point, I wouldn't bother taking it. I would just take the commander on foot, if that makes any sense, because it still has the same issues as the non-command version, but now a very valuable unit, especially for spotting, and just the command and control of your army is now in it. So don't recommend either of these vehicles, to be honest. Skip over them if you can, and just go for something a little better, or take maybe something from the light tank path, a lot better in the Soviet tech tree. FII-M, essentially it's the same car, it's just slightly slower. It is a little bit different. It does have the sort of armored domes for the commander and driver, so it is a different vehicle, but not really in terms of playability. So kind of the same issues. Now later on, we have the BA-64B, so same armament, a little bit slower, but it has actually armor that's somewhat viable now, 6 to 15. So that's going to be proof against pretty much any small arms. Now you are still running on wheels, so that's a problem, but that's kind of just an issue with armored cars. So that's really not something you can hold against it. And now you are able to, effectively be an armored vehicle. Now, the problem is that the turret is open-topped, and I have lost crew in this to small arms fire just because of that. So you do have to still be careful, but it is a pretty versatile scouting vehicle. So if you're later on in the game and you do want to take a very, very light armored car, it's not bad. I know in the Valor mod, this is available to a lot of the Czech units as well. So not a bad little armored car. It's a useful way to get, a bit of firepower around. It's good for scouting. It's pretty mobile, but it's not, it's definitely not the best option. I think the Soviets rely a lot more on their light tanks for recce, which is fair. But if you do want to take an armored car, it's not a bad bet. It's a little underwhelming in my opinion. Now getting into some of the heavy armored cars, though, that's something that the Soviets do have very early on in the game, which is, in my opinion, kind of great. That they can take armored cars that have pretty much the same armament as tanks a lot earlier than other forces. A lot of the Americans, the Germans, kind of the most you'll get at this point is a heavy machine gun or an autocannon, if that. With the Soviets, you can get essentially the same firepower, or more in this case, as a light tank. It just has less armor, but that's okay. It's an armored car. So that's definitely a great plus for the Soviets. The BA-6 has 3 to 9 armor, which is still quite light, so you are very vulnerable. You need to support this with infantry, and you really need to be careful about especially anti-tank rifles, or really anything with any armor penetrating capability. But you do have that 45 millimeter anti-tank gun, which allows you to stand off quite a bit. And if you're working with infantry, it can be a pretty good unit. That being said, it won't last long if you come up against something with an anti-tank gun. But early on, you might actually outgun them. So not a bad vehicle to take. I personally don't go for that many armored cars just because of the scale a lot of the fighting, especially in conquest battles. I think really just go for a tank at that point, because recce to me can kind of be accomplished with a lot of your infantry and a lot of your armor. That's just my own play style. So if you do want to take an armored car, especially early on, this is a great unit to take, and it does give you a lot of that firepower that you really would only get in a tank this early in a conquest battle. So not a bad vehicle. Definitely recommend it. Not necessarily something I usually take, but still quite a good vehicle, though quite lightly armored. It is going to be a lot slower just because it does have a lot more on it. So keep that in mind. Not necessarily the most effective recce vehicle. Now, the next one is essentially just an improvement. The BA-10. Same armament, so you have the hull-mounted machine gun, which is really quite useful, actually. A coaxial and the 45 millimeter anti-tank gun. You've got more armor, so 6 to 10 now, which is pretty good. You can shrug off small arms fire, though you're still going to be vulnerable to anything with armor penetrating capability, but that's okay. It's an armored car. You are a little bit quicker as well. So this kind of solves, I think, some of the downsides of the BA-6, but it's, still a pretty solid vehicle for early on. Though, do be careful and don't get overconfident with it. So, pretty good. I would take it if you want to do the armored car route. Now, going into some of the Lend-Lease vehicles, it's great that they have included it in the game. I think a lot of times people do forget just the amount of military aid that the Soviet Union got from the West. And the first that you can get is the M3A1E1 scout car. Gotta love those American designations, the white scout car. This has got, okay armor. You're good against small arms, but you are open-topped. And the crew, especially the gunner, is vulnerable. So you have to keep that in mind. But you do have a Browning 50 cal on the front and a 30 cal facing the rear. So you have a lot of firepower, and you can outrange a lot of small arms, even medium machine guns with that. And that thing really does shred infantry. You can even take out some lighter armored cars with it as well. So still quite a useful weapon. Really great way to get a heavy machine gun around the battlefield. Great for fast response. And it's great for fire support. You can also tow with it. So quite a versatile vehicle, though you are going to be vulnerable. Be careful with how you're using it. Don't necessarily treat it like you would a lot of the previous armored cars. And finally, the universal carriers. So the Soviets have access to 2 of these, the medium machine gun version and the version with the light machine gun, the DT. So the medium machine gun version, I think, is by far the better option. You do get the Maxim machine gun, which gives a lot of firepower, good sustained fire, great medium machine gun. And you also get the PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle, which allows you to deal with, really any armored car or really light tanks early on in conquest battles. And it's not too bad later on for dealing with soft skins, dealing with emplacements, things like that. Now, its armor is pretty good. It's okay against, small arms fire, but you are still going to have to worry about anything with armor penetrating capability. That's okay. The main issue is your crew are quite vulnerable. The gunner up top doesn't really have any protection, so you're going to have to be careful. You might have to actually use cover with this, get it behind something, but it's a good way to move a machine gun around the battlefield. Don't necessarily treat it as an armored car, treat it as a way to get a support weapon around, and I think you'll do a lot better with it. Now, the problem with the universal carrier armed with the DT is the Maxim's a great medium machine gun. You can offer sustained fire support. The DT you can't. You don't have the range and you don't have the same firepower, so it's kind of the same vehicle and the same downsides without the real big benefit of having the medium machine gun on it. So I wouldn't really recommend taking this. It's not as good, and you still have the same vulnerabilities. So definitely keep that in mind. The one great thing about universal carriers that I haven't mentioned yet is that they can tow. So getting your anti-tank guns into position, getting anti-aircraft guns, artillery, things like that, they're really quite useful. And then you can basically offer them fire support, especially against infantry. Anti-tank guns, things like that, are quite vulnerable to infantry attack. So if you park this nearby, you've now got a medium machine gun, and that's actually quite an effective combination. So overall, I think the Soviets have access to some pretty interesting armored cars. I think there's a few decent options with the heavy armored cars, and definitely the Lend-Lease equipment. The main issue with it is that, you're a bit limited, and I think they kind of overpromise, underdeliver. So maybe a better route, and this is just my recommendation, is if you want something that's mobile, good for scouting, good for that sort of armored car purpose, go for some of the light tanks, the T-70, the BT tanks, things like that. You've got the mobility with a little better protection, and I think that's really where the Soviet forces kind of maybe end up, is use light tanks in place of armored cars sometimes. That's just my opinion. Historically not necessarily accurate, but in terms of gameplay. So let me know what you think, and let me know what faction you want to see next. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and I appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Bye.